Welcome, everybody. Good Shabbat. Today is a very auspicious day. We begin a new discussion series. We're going to begin talking about the book of Job. So, this is part one of a series. So, we'll be discussing this during every sacrament of Shabbat. And I do welcome you to come and experience Shabbat live with us. It's a very short ceremony prior to this topic that we discuss each Friday evening. Let's begin our study of the book of Job. So the book of Job, historical points and key concepts. The book of Job is named for its central figure, Job. In Jewish tradition, suffering is the penalty for sin or not adhering to the commandments of Torah. So when there are many commandments, not just the 10 commandments, but all the mitzvot of the Hebrew Bible or the Hebrew Testament, whenever a faithful Jew does not observe any one of those, he or she is sinning. And that sin creates a temporary separation between that soul and God. And by repenting of that mistake, instantly God is said to embrace that soul and bring him back into the fold right away. So forgiveness of sin is directly with God, not with some other being. And by doing the commandments that we were forsaking before, we purify ourselves. We get a certain amount of divine energy, so to speak, which we'll talk about later on in this series. But the basic idea is that throughout Jewish history, the idea of somebody being sick or poor was thought to be resultant from sin. So it was God's justice that somebody would become sick or that somebody would become poor, was one of the thoughts in Jewish tradition, not the only viewpoint, but one of the viewpoints. So the problem is that the book of Job seeks to answer the timeless question, why do bad things happen to good people? Job was notably righteous before God, yet he suffered tremendously. Why? If Job was not a sinner, why did he suffer the loss of his business? All of his agricultural cattle died. Then all of his family members died. Then he lost his health. One thing after the next happened to Job. And back in those days of Israel, it was thought that if these types of things happened to you, that you must be a great sinner. But Job was in fact quite righteous, and he didn't sin, but yet he was suffering tremendously. So this book, as part of the Jewish wisdom tradition, seeks to answer, why do bad things happen to good people? So in modern Bibles, Job appears in the Ketuvim, which is the area where poetical books are at, and wisdom books of the Hebrew Bible or Hebrew Testament reside. The book's author is anonymous, and it is not certain when it was written. A lot of people like to say it's the oldest book in the Hebrew Testament online, but actually nobody could really know that because we don't know exactly when it was written to make that assertion. Most scholars date it between the 7th and 4th centuries, as Job is mentioned in Ezekiel, which is thought to have been written at about the 6th century BCE, so before Christ. Scholars identify that Job was edited and redacted over the course of time, as they suggest that the prose, prologue, and epilogue reveal a tale about Job that is older than the poetical exegesis within the core of the text. See Ezekiel 14, verses 14 and 20. It has also commonly been thought that the speeches of Elihu, chapters 32 through 37, and the poem on wisdom, chapter 28, are later additions to the book's first edition. So there's more than one author of this book, is what most non-biased biblical scholars will say. A portion of it was written, and then other portions were added over time as thoughts developed. And that's a very important thing to understand about Judaism that is to be admired. This is not talking down Judaism. Judaism, unlike modern Orthodox Christianity, the leaders of Judaism were very tolerant of different viewpoints. People had different ideas. Some people believed in a form of physical resurrection. Other people believed in a form of spiritual resurrection where you had a spiritual body that raised from the dead, not a physical body from the grave like a zombie. Others believed in no resurrection at all. Likewise, there are many different kinds of messianic expectations. In Judea, the expectation was the Davidic Messiah, the warrior Messiah. In Babylon, we saw the Son of Mankind Messiah that Jesus preached, which is a collective Messiah. It's a communion of saints. So the Son of Man, the Baranash, which translates to Son of Mankind, is a collective Messiah that was talked about in Talmudic exegesis. So it's very important to know that there are very different ideas within the many sects of Judaism that exist today, and those sects that existed back at the time of Jesus also had different viewpoints. And these were all tolerated. They weren't expected to believe one way. Yes, they may have debated heatedly, they may have disagreed with each other, but you were allowed to believe different things. And the Jewish religion was allowed to evolve from ancient times, even into the days of modern era. So from ancient times to the medieval era to the modern times of today, Judaism continues to evolve and adapt and survive on new circumstances. And that is something to be admired. Whereas Christianity has stuck to very old, ancient, medieval ideas that no longer suit this age and that are probably, in many cases, 70% or more, not historically accurate to the Jesus of history. We could say that the Jewish religion is quite evolved and is still evolving even today. So back then, when Job was first released, as the years, decades went on, other writers added to Job to expand upon prior concepts, to elaborate upon certain concepts. So one of the origin stories of Satan is found in the book of Job. So it's very, very interesting to see the role of Satan in this book. In this book, the book of Job, Shaitan, Satan, is not a devil or a demon at all, but an archangel of God, sent to test Job's endless devotion and faithfulness to God. So the original Satan, before the Orthodox Christians used him as a scapegoat for all evil, he was a servant of God, and he tested people to see if they would adhere to their devotion and faithfulness to God. So again, the original Satan, known as Shaitan, was not a devil at all, but he was an archangel. And of course, Christian lore says that, yes, Satan or Lucifer was an archangel that fell from heaven. This isn't spoken about in the book of Job. Job is just an archangel that tests humanity on behalf of God, as we'll see when we read the book of Job. So within the book of Job, there are several theological answers to why Job is a good person who suffers for no logical reason. These discrepancies, one, reflect multiple authors and redactions over the course of time, and two, the flexibility of the Jewish religion to not always accept one interpretation of an event, historical or allegorical, as the case may be. So in Job chapter 1, verse 1, we read, "There was once a man in the land of Uz, whose name was Job. That man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil." So right off the bat, we hear that Job is basically a saint. He's a tzaddik, a perfected one. He's blameless, sinless, and upright. He feared God, and that's why he followed the commandments then known to Jews. He turned away from evil. Why? Because it was commonly thought once more that when you sin, that the result is that God will seek justice for those sins. That a great sinner might be somebody who's sickly, leprous, diseased, poor, unfortunate in so many different ways. It is thought in those times that whenever you did the commandments, when you fulfilled the commandments of Torah, that God blessed you, gave you health, riches, long life, children, especially sons, that would extend your family lineage, so on and so forth. So these are very key figures to understand, key concepts to understand about the basis of the Jewish religion. But right off the bat, we learn that Job is a saint and that he's sinless. So Shaitan converses with God or gossips with God about Job. So Job chapter 1, verses 6 through 12, we find this conversation between Shaitan and God. One day the heavenly beings came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. The Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, "From going to and fro on the earth and walking up and down on it." The Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There's no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil." Then Satan answered the Lord, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not put a fence around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand now and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face." The Lord said to Satan, "Very well. All that he has is in your power. Only do not stretch out your hand against him." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Very interesting, right? So even though Satan here is one of the heavenly beings present before the Lord in heaven, not in hell, Satan is an archangel in heaven with other heavenly beings talking to God. We still see that Satan is kind of like a tempter, right? He has this side of him that tempts or tests people. So it's very important whenever you read the letter of James, James emphatically says that God does not tempt. It is our own desires that tempt us and lead us astray from the way of God, the way of life, spiritual life, and away from the way of death or spiritual ignorance. So God saying, "Hey, where have you been?" And Satan saying, "Oh, well, I've been hanging out pretty much everywhere." And he said, "Oh, in your travels, did you see my servant Job? He's really cool. He's really good. He does everything right and he's blameless." And Satan kind of raises an eyebrow. He kind of is doubting God in a sense. He says, "Does Job fear God for nothing? You have put a fence around him and his house and all that he has on every side." What does that mean? This fence is around Job and his property and his family, and it's protecting him. So basically, Satan says, well, what does Job have to fear? You're protecting him. And the reason why God's protecting him is because he's blameless and upright before God. So God is thought to protect those that follow the way, that do the way of the Torah. So what Satan challenges God is he said, well, if you didn't protect him, and if you took away all of your blessings and you cursed him, he would be cursing you. He would not be your devotee. He would not be your servant, but he'd say that God is evil or God is bad or God is unrighteous. So, God, Satan insinuates, if Job is so special and loves you so much and is your servant, take away everything from him and see if he still loves you. That is what this essentially is saying here. So looking down here in the bottom left-hand corner of the slide, we see heavenly beings is literally in Hebrew, sons of God. So sons of God was also a Hebrew way of talking about angels. And also son of God became a term that was an honorary term for Jewish saints, for Sadiq, for a perfected being. They were also called sons of God, meaning that perfected beings are angelic or spiritual in nature, or spiritually natured, divine in nature, etc., due to their fulfillment of the commandments of Torah. Satan literally means the accuser. The original Hebrew term for Satan was ha-satan, ha-satan. So here, the accusation that Satan is making is that if you take away all of your blessings from Job, he will no longer be your servant. He will no longer love you. So stop protecting him and see how he behaves. That is the challenge of Shaitan, Satan, to God, Yahweh. So Job chapter 121 continues this idea. And it expresses a very important key concept that is very true today. This is one of the most important lessons that we can learn from the whole of the book of Job, in my opinion. Job is noted as saying, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. So basically, God allows Satan to take away his whole business. All of his cattle die, which are the source of his wealth, the source of his food, the source of how he supports his family. And Satan starts by taking away all of his possessions that give him financial security. So first, Satan attacks Job on the financial level. He takes away everything. And Job doesn't budge, but Job says, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the name of the Lord. So he actually blesses God. He doesn't curse God. He doesn't speak against God. He says, blessed is God, because everything comes from God. So God has the right to take everything away if he wants. This is such a profound teaching. And if we follow this teaching in our daily life, we'll suffer a lot less. If we see everything that is in our life as a personal loan from God, then we'll suffer less. God gives us money, and likewise, he can take it away. God gives us a home, and he can take back that home. God gives us a wife, a husband, and he can take that away. So everything in life, people, places, things, possessions, jobs, education, everything is a result of God's grace. That's what Job is saying. The Lord gives, he blesses, and the Lord has taken away. So he's saying that ownership of everything is God's, which only makes sense because if God has created everything or God has emanated everything, everything belongs to God. So if God chooses to give it to us, he's blessing us. And if God chooses to take something away, then that's God's prerogative. I'm not going to speak against God because God must know what's good for me and God must know what's bad for me, right? So God may have taken away all of my financial security to bless me. That was Job's perspective. So Job kind of shocked Satan because Satan expected him to say, oh my God, you took away my financial security. How can I feed my family? Why did you do this to me, God? But instead, Job, a great saint of the Hebrew Testament, says, the Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And the first part refers to impermanence. He is saying that everything is impermanent in this life. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. So this is a very interesting phrase too, because he's obviously not talking about his biological mother. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. What? Is he going to crawl back up into his mother's womb? No. So he's saying that he's referring to God as mother, is what he's doing here, because God is both father and mother. God is one. There's one deity that is honored by the Jewish people, and that is God, Yahweh. And he's called by many names. But God is also both male and female in one. He is transcendent in his father aspect, and he is immanent in his mother or spiritual nature. And throughout the Hebrew Testament, that female aspect of God was called Chokmah. It was also called Sophia. Chokmah is the Hebrew name for wisdom. Sophia is the Greek equivalent for Chokmah, which also means wisdom. So this wisdom aspect of God is the wife of God, poetically. But really that the wisdom of God is the feminine aspect, and the power, the sustaining part of creation is the masculine part. So he's saying, naked I came from my mother's womb, the divine mother, Chokmah, Sophia, and naked shall I return back to that spirit. So he's saying, I come into the world with nothing, and I'm going to leave the world with nothing. It's God's grace that provides for me while I have this life. So even the clothes of my body I don't have in the beginning, and in the end I have to return my clothes to go back to where I came from. So it's very beautiful. You have this idea of impermanence. So rather than getting upset, getting worked up, and suffering more than he had to, when all of his cattle were struck dead and he lost this whole life's savings, he lost everything, his ability to feed himself, his children, to sustain his property, to have any sense of security in this world. Instead, Job said, well, I need to calm down and recognize that a spiritual truth, a universal spiritual truth, is that everything is impermanent. And another universal spiritual truth I need to remind myself in this difficult time is that the Lord gives everything by his grace, and the Lord has the right to take everything away, to also bless me with spiritual renunciation and other qualities of non-attachment to the material world, etc. So Job understood that this was some kind of test, right? Job understood that a spiritual test was happening to him. And at this point, the first test of losing all of his animals, losing his way of making a living, he passed with flying colors. Satan's test failed. The archangel of testing humanity did not win the bet with God so far. We'll continue to discuss this next Friday, whenever we talk about how Job lost all of his family members. His support system died. So imagine losing not one of your beloved family members, but losing all of them. That is the next test that we will hear about next week, and we'll learn about how Job responded to that situation. Let's end with the second cup of blessing. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother of the universe, please bless all of us with the wisdom to know that everything that we possess, everything that enriches our lives, people, places, things, education, all of it is a gift from God to bless us and give us the strength of heart and the wisdom to know that when God takes away, it is not to punish us, but to strengthen us and to help us to depend on God alone. Please bless us with this wisdom and help us to attain perfection of this understanding now and always. Amen. 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 Thank you, everybody, for coming. Good Shabbat. I hope to see you for the Liturgy of the Chalice this Sunday. We're going to continue talking about the Gospel of Mark then. Have a beautiful Shabbat. Rest in God's infinite peace and blessing. And I'll see you soon. Thank you. Good Shabbat.